Well, hey, we want to get into foundations today. The goal of this is we have 5 classes that we're going to go through. We're going to take a hiatus for a little bit here, and we'll come back in a few weeks and do class 2. We'll let you know in advance when that'll happen. But over the 5 weeks, we want to give you the foundations for our church. Both people that are here and watching online today, just what our church is about, how we function, the vision, the core values, all those different things. So we broke it into 5 different weeks, and each week will be very different from the next. And so this is the first one. This is probably the lightest of them, but it's important because this sets the tone for where we move forward. And so today what we're talking about is who's who. So sometimes when you can go to a church, it feels a little bit like a Where's Waldo book. Because you're just like, you're trying to figure out who goes with who and what's happening and who runs this and who does that. So we want to give you the lowdown for how things currently are in our church and some people that serve in very specific areas. So let's jump into it this morning with our first one. We've got some pictures to go along. Some people will love me today and some people will not because of the pictures we've chosen to use. And we'll find out at the end of service who thought what. But that is our office administrator, Hannah Granados. I almost had Olson, but I remembered. We got you guys married a few weeks ago. Hannah serves as our office administrator. She is part-time. She has flex hours. Normally, it's Thursday evenings that she's in because she also works a full-time job at Webster's in the floral department. Not in the floral department, but the last time I talked with her, it was the floral department. So, do you have a department? She delivers. So they let you drive?
I'm the full-time delivery driver.
All right. Everybody wear helmets when you're driving around Ripon. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. I can feel the stones starting to come already. Let's go to our next one here. And that lovely lady is Kathy Gitzel, who serves a very important role, and I am very blessed to have her as our bookkeeper. And if you thought, I don't know if anybody's ever done books for a church before, let me tell you, it gets more and more complicated each and every year. She puts a ton of time in, especially when it comes to payroll, because that gets ridiculous. But we want to thank her for serving as our bookkeeper. How many years have you been doing the books, Kathy?
Since 2004.
Woo! So the good news, she's told me though, she is celebrating because the books are really, really good. So she's like, thank you for not adding more to our stress. So that's great. Let's go to our next one. So this person is our children's coordinator. That's Jackie Wiggers. She served as our children's coordinator for 4 years, right around there. And she is just awesome. She has grown so much. She's been part of this church for a lot longer than that. And man, did she not do a great job last week with our kids up here for VGMC? How awesome was that? And so she serves in that area, and she's doing a great job. She works as a full-time art teacher in Rosendale. So she has always a full plate. We're always telling her she needs to do less and not more because she works very, very hard. Our next person here, you may know that person too. That's Adrian Granados, and we're announcing this morning for the first time that Adrian and Hannah are going to be overseeing our youth department, which we'll be launching, which will be very different from what we've seen in the past, but very excited about that, and so we're still working on some details there, but super excited to be working with them. And I got to tell you, I love watching Adrian grow over the last few years, and it's always awesome to partner with him in ministry, and so very excited about what the future holds for us there. I'm going to actually get into my notes so I can know who's coming next. That might be a good thing. Oh, this guy, you might have seen him a few times here at church. That's the lead pastor, and so he's a little weird, a little crazy, but that's okay because people love him anyway. Our next group is our church board. So this is important. The way that we do ministry is we work as a church board. You might notice that I serve on the board as well. I'm default chairman of the board by my position as lead pastor. We currently have 5 board members: Nancy Nichols, Don Fader, John Schiltz, David Bruss, and Brad Thompson. And we work our board very differently. We're a team. So this isn't a thing where we come in and all we're concerned about is the books and the numbers. We look over those things. But really, we come together and say, what is God speaking to us? How can we fulfill what God has called us to do? And we wrestle with really difficult things sometimes. But you know what? We work through that, And we've got an amazing board. They work really well together. We're almost always unified on everything that we do because we work the issue until we come to a conclusion. And so they are great. They serve very diligently. They do more behind the scenes than you could ever know. So if you see any of them today, please let them know that you appreciate them because they work very hard. And then we've got our head usher, Ron Fader, who also serves our Ripon Fire Department. So every once in a while, you'll hear some noises go off in church, and Ron shoots out the door. He is our very own Superman. And so he serves our community well, and he serves and loves people in this church incredibly well. Does a great job as our head usher and deals with a lot of the things on a Sunday morning to take the headache off of me. So I appreciate Ron very much. And he is married to Dawn, and so they go together. Our next one, that's good to know. That's good to know. Our next is our cleaning team, Lisa Granados and her husband, Jairo. Lisa usually comes in on Thursdays, but she does a lot of cleaning outside of that. And let me tell you, that lady works hard to disinfect this place every single week and clean things up and keep things moving. And so Lisa does a great job as our cleaning person and bringing her husband into the fold as well. She makes him do all the dirty jobs in the church. So that's okay. That's the way it should be. We've got a great maintenance team here at our church. Anthony Naparella is now handling our general maintenance. So when there's a light out or something like that, that's the guy who is handling that. Thank you, Anthony, for doing that. Luz Rivera handles a lot of stuff on our grounds from time to time, as well as some snow removal. And we will be putting a snow removal team together here in the near future. Hopefully not too near, but it's coming at some point. It would be nice if it stayed away for a little bit longer. And then Rick Staub is our arborist. He handles all of our different plants and trees and trimmings and those kind of things. We've got a couple trees we need to trim back here probably before the winter. And he also likes chickens, according to that picture. I don't know why I have a picture of Rick with a chicken and not like a bush or something as an arborist, but that's okay. I like that picture. So our kitchen coordinator is Chris Schiltz. She is apparently a ninja because I can never get a picture of her. So if you ever see someone in the kitchen working, you're like, that might be Chris Schiltz. You might want to ask if that's her. We also are developing grow groups. This is something we did before COVID that we're going to get back into. And these are, we used to have Sunday school, but we said, look, let's redefine what that is. And we started talking about grow groups, which are opportunities for us to come together and have discussion and teaching, a little different format than we do in a Sunday morning worship experience. And so we do have some grow group leaders we'd like to introduce to you this morning. Our first one is Dawn Fader, and she does a Sunday morning class that we think will be in our lounge area, which is back in our education wing. She teaches an adult class there. Robin Gitzel does a Sunday morning class that's the Purple Book. It's adults and teens, and it is phenomenal. He takes our devotional that we give away for free and breaks that out into teaching sessions. And how long were you teaching before COVID, Robin? Were we doing the Purple Book? 2 years?
2 or 3 years.
Yeah, and we still haven't gotten all the way through it yet. And then he'll cycle back and start again. And so it's a great class to get into, to build your foundations, to talk about developing your Christian walk with Christ. And then I currently do a grow group on Wednesdays, and we focus in on prayer. But one of the things that we've started to do is we take Sunday morning's message and we take just 1 point from, usually there's 3 points, sometimes there's more, sometimes there's less. But we take one of the points and we go a little bit further in it. And we just talk about how then do we develop that in our life. It's been really good what God's been doing. And for the next several weeks, we're going to be focusing in on prayer specifically for what God wants to do in services moving through the rest of September and into October. We also have kids grow groups that are in development. We'll have more on that in the future because all of our kids teachers have said it's time for us to transition, and so we're currently rebuilding our grow groups for Sunday morning grow groups for kids, so we'll have more on that. And then one of the things we want to launch into is to be able to empower you to do a grow group at your workplace or at your home with the amazing tools that we have. The Purple Book, Right Now Media, all these great things that you can use to do your own group at your house or at your workplace or on your campus. We've got some tremendous worship leaders. We have 3 worship leaders. Mike Nichols, who kind of oversees our worship team and development. Robin Gitzel, who will be leading worship later today. And new to the fold, Adrian Granados, who has been leading a few times here this last summer and spring. And he rocks when he does worship. He's also leading worship for the college ministry, at least the last time we talked that was happening. We haven't talked for 2 weeks, and things changed so quickly. He's doing a great job over there. We've got a great AV and tech team led by David Bruss. He used to run a radio station, and then you didn't know that about Dave, did you? We still got surprises that we throw out once in a while. Jeff Vanderscaff, who's really helped us, and Jeff's in the sound booth today, really helped us to just take things to the next level in so many different areas. And then Anthony Naparella is back there serving as well today, and they're expanding their team all the time. Anthony's often the guy who comes in and runs sound for me for funerals and things, and so very grateful for our AV team who does a great job. And then we do have a missions team, which is Jairo and Mike and Nancy. Currently, we have a pause on overseas mission trips, and part of that reason, there's a few reasons for that. One I can share with you today is currently a lot of places that we would go, you right now, the requirements for you to be able to go and fly to these places is challenging. But not only that, but when you get there, you have to spend 10 days in quarantine. And that's a lot of finances as money to go spend time in a hotel somewhere and then turn around and try to do days of ministry. It's not cost effective. And we would rather just support our missionaries right now, but we are looking at some home missions things that we might talk about here in the coming weeks and months ahead, opportunities to engage in some trips for you, and then overseas trips with our church we plan to resume in the future when God gives us a green light on that. One of the tools that's available to you at our church is our website. Through our website now we have portals to a bunch of the different ministry that takes place during the week. One of the things that we've seen over the last year and a half is a huge uptick on what happens online. So we're engaged during the week in several different aspects of ministry. One of the things that we do is we have these short prayer time ministry minutes that we do throughout the week, which has had some really great engagement with people. There is a portal on our webpage that you can connect to that live. You go click on it, bring it up, and we do that several times a week. We also have a link and a portal to our YouTube page where we have special events that are posted there, including what will be the Foundations class. You can also, this is really cool and new, our sign up for Right Now Media is linked to our homepage. So if you have a coworker or a friend, you're talking to them and they're talking about, I just wish I had more tools, I wish I had something that I could study or listen to at work, guess what? You can sign them up, go to our website, walk them through the process, which is really easy. I think there's like 5 blanks you got to fill in. They can have a Right Now Media account that's free for them. They can engage with the gospel, and you can help somebody grow in Christ. So great tools available for you on our webpage. Now, to end our Foundations class today, for the next few moments, what I'd like to do today is share my testimony with you. How does a guy like me end up in ministry and leading such a phenomenal church with great people here in Ripon, Wisconsin? So I'm going to try to condense this down in the next several minutes for you to give a little background on me and some things that maybe I've never really talked about in front of people a whole lot. And so to know a little bit about me, I grew up in northern Maine. In fact, grew up in a place called Limestone. You can see it there on the star. Somebody's like, I didn't even know the United States went that far north. I couldn't throw a baseball to Canada, but close, very close. We were 5 minutes away from the Canadian border. I grew up around moose and black bears, and moose are far worse than black bears, I will tell you that. And so I grew up in northern Maine. I still have a lot of family that lives up there. It's a very interesting, New England area is very interesting and very different from Midwest. I'm not saying there's not great people in New England, but attitudes are very different and perspectives are very different in New England. And especially when it comes to the Pentecostal church movement in New England. It's not as friendly typically. And so there's a little bit that goes into that with my story. But so I grew up in northern Maine. My mom's name was Bonnie. My dad's name was Jeff. My dad served in the military in Vietnam. Super proud of my dad. He was in the Army, And on a mission that he was on with him and his unit, they were flying back in a helicopter when they came underneath fire. And my dad's helicopter was going down. It was crashing. And as it came down, my dad's buddy grabbed my dad and threw themselves out of the helicopter. My dad's friend got caught up in some trees, and the reports are very differently. I have two different reports that say what happened to my dad. One says that my dad was severely injured in a tree. The other says that he fell to the ground and they found him with his head gashed open on a rock. My dad had severe brain trauma. And so he actually, when he got back to the States, had to learn how to walk, talk, all these things, all these skills that we take for granted, had to learn all that over again. And as we grew up, there were moments where my dad would have these flashbacks to being in Vietnam. It was very scary as a kid. He would wake up and think that he was in the jungle. He would wake up and think that the enemy was in our house, and very traumatic. And so that was very, very rough on my mom. At times, my dad could be abusive, and so it was very difficult. My parents ended up getting divorced, but one of the things about my dad was he was a licensed evangelist with the Assemblies of God. And my dad, I loved him. I still love him, but it was very challenging. My dad got wrapped up in PTL movement, for some of you that might remember that, with Jim Bakker and a lot of the televangelists, and envisioned that he always wanted to be in that role. And while some of those ministries are great, and some fruit came out of those ministries, I don't want to deny that. We also know that out of some of those ministries came tremendous heartache. And my dad really wrestled with serving God and serving the flesh as a minister. And he tended to manipulate people and wanted things, the nice car and those kind of things. So I grew up with very much a disdain towards ministry because everybody else saw my dad preach behind a pulpit. I saw my dad at home. And those were two very different worlds. My dad eventually got out of ministry, and it wasn't working because of his health conditions and things. And so I really grew up not wanting to really be involved in church. Now, I will say this: God was tremendously faithful to me as a young man and as a child. On 4 separate occasions in my life, I've seen God spare my life in dramatic supernatural fashion. As a young boy at 5 years old, we were swimming at a hotel by ourselves, just my family, when I was drowning in the water. My family was in the hot tub. And I very specifically remember slipping underneath the water, and all of a sudden a hand reaching into the water and pulling me out of the water. My mom came running and found me laying next to the pool. And as I came to, I kept saying, "Who pulled me out? Who pulled me out?" And they said, "There's no one in here but us." And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was an angel that pulled me out of the water as a kid. So I had these incredible encounters with God. But I was very torn because of what I had experienced, what I had. And have you ever been there? Where your experiences, it's hard sometimes to break through our experiences to engage in faith. But my mom remarried to a great man, and I have a great relationship with my stepdad. And his name is Ralph, and some of you have met him. And their marriage is solid, and it's a great experience, and I'm glad to have that my stepdad in my life. And encouraged us to go to church and do those things. So I was even working through those issues as a young man. When we lived in Texas, because my stepdad was in Air Force, he was in intelligence, and we lived in Dyess Air Force Base in Abilene, Texas. And we lived there, and we'd go to church, a Baptist church, from time to time. And my parents always wanted us to engage in biblical values. And so we grew up, but there was always this wrestling inside of me. And we were actually getting ready to move from Texas to the Netherlands, where my dad was stationed, or going to be stationed. And we were staying in a motorhome. And so we were doing this tour of family reunions and that kind of stuff in this motorhome. And the night before we left, I found myself just in a place where you start to, and I was a teenager at this point, you start feeling this nudge, this wrestling. where you feel like maybe God is calling. And I prayed one of the most simplest prayers of my life, but it was heartfelt. And I think that's important. Prayer is just not words we speak. It's the connection of our heart. And I remember before I went to bed that night, praying out loud outside that motorhome and saying, Jesus, if you're real, if you can just show me that you're real, you can have my life and you can do whatever you want with it. But I need to know you're real. And I'd wrestled with a long time with where God was, by what my experiences and all that. And that evening, as I went to sleep, I had an encounter with the King. And in a dream, I met Jesus. Before I ever got saved, Jesus called me into ministry. Because I remember it vividly, the things that Jesus walked me through. I remember these really tall guys. I'm assuming that they're angels. They were very tall. And I remember him walking me through these incredible things. And at the time, you're seeing these things and you're like, I have no idea what all this means, right? He took me to this map, and there was this map, and it was like this globe laid out with all these little teeny squares. And I remember this voice saying, this is my plan. And then it was like it zoomed in, like super zoom. And it one little teeny square, and the voice said, and this is my plan for you. And then he took me to this incredible island, and we were walking around, and he took me to this pier where there was all these cages with all these animals. And he took my hands and he placed it on the cage. We opened these cages, and the animals came out, and he said, I'm going to call you to set the captive free. He took me to a small little, these almost puddles. They were ponds, and in one was this huge, filthy. The water was so dirty you couldn't see anything, but you could tell there was something living inside because of the movement. And he stuck his hands on mine, put my hands into that dirty water, grabbed the fish, and put it over into clean water. And instantly, as that fish moved over to the clean water, it became alive. Little did I realize then, Jesus was calling me to save people, to reach people for Christ. There was a lot more that went into that dream. At the end of that dream, though, I will tell you this. I began to walk down this walkway, this huge bridge. And as I walked down this walkway, I started with Jesus, and then he kind of wasn't there. But as I walked, different people would come into my path. And we would walk for a season together, and they would fade away, and someone else would come in. I have met several people in my life since that moment that I met in that dream as confirmation that that was from God and not from my flesh. I woke up that morning and instantly knew I had had an encounter with God. I mean, you could feel it. And then just like this, we talk about revelation as a word in Christian culture. The best way I can describe revelation is instantaneous knowledge that you would not have otherwise. And in a moment, in a flash, the entire dream played back in my mind. I'm awake, and I understood what it all meant. Everything. And I've not shared everything in that dream with you. And I began to just weep. And I mean, uncontrollably. And I got out of the bed in that motorhome, and on the edge of that bed began to pray. That Jesus, I know you're real. And I don't know how to do this, but I want to follow you. I woke up the next morning a changed individual. I ran to all of my friends. I'm not kidding. I ran to all of my friends that I had, because we're getting ready to leave. Like we're pulling out of town for forever. And I ran to my friends and I was like, I just have to tell you one thing. Jesus is real, man, and you need him in your life. And they thought I was crazy. I had no idea how to do this. I just was like, I was so excited about this. And I remember saying something to my parents and they were like, what is wrong with you? But they couldn't understand because I had had this moment with God that totally changed and transformed my life. From there, we went to the Netherlands. Wasn't able to go to the international school. And here's the reason, because I'm dumb. Because when we went overseas, it was a NATO assignment. So there was no American school. You had to go to a NATO school. One of the things they wanted you to do was they wanted you to take, your first year there was to take a language other than the one that you have. And so if you were German, you couldn't take German. You had to take another class. So as being an American and speaking English, you had to choose another class. German, French, there's a bunch of them you could choose from. Year 2, then you had to take one of your core classes in that language. And I was like, well, I'm failing whatever class that is. So I decided that I talked with my parents, and we homeschooled. They allowed us to homeschool, and part of that, you were able to choose an elective, and I got to choose Bible as my elective. And so for a year and a half living in the Netherlands, that was my first exposure really to discipleship. Probably didn't do as good a job as I should have. We moved from there to Nebraska, where I became a part of Bellevue Christian Center, an Assemblies of God church that was founded by the Mayos. And I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the Mayos. If you ever meet Jeannie Mayo, she's still alive. Her husband is no longer with us. Jeannie is the craziest lady on the face of the planet. When her mom died, she did the youth ministry at Bellevue Christian Center, and the youth ministry ranged anywhere from 200 to 550, depending on the year. And when her mom died, she did a special youth service, and she had a coffin in the service. She preached the whole message, and when she got done, she opened the coffin, and her mom's body was in the coffin. Every person at that service was at the altar getting saved for the whatever time. I'm like, there were no dry eyes, there was nothing. Now, if you did that today, someone's going to jail. But I mean, that's just how Jeannie was. She was like, look, mom's already in heaven. She'd be fine with her using her body in a sermon illustration. I'm like, okay, whatever. So I guess the church I grew up from. Now all of a sudden you're like, I understand pastor's ministry. I was like, he's crazy. But grew up in there, had a great opportunity to experience tremendous relationships with great men of God who serve in capacities across our nation and across the world. Several of our national leaders that are at our national office now, I went to church with out of Bellevue Christian Center. And what a privilege that was. Did a program called Master's Commission, gave a year of my life to serving the Lord. From there, I felt like I needed to intern, which was really weird. I was at this church that had all these opportunities, and I remember telling them, my pastor at the time, I said, I need to experience something other than what I've had for the last several years. Because every church, every ministry is not going to be like Bellevue Christian Center, and I need to experience something else. So a friend of mine was going home for Thanksgiving, and I went with him, and they lived in Norfolk, Nebraska, and his dad was the youth pastor. And I hung out for a weekend there, and I was like, I feel like I should intern at this church. But I had sent my resume to several churches asking if I could possibly intern with them, just come and serve for a year. I wasn't looking for a paycheck. I just wanted to serve. And Norfolk opened up. The senior pastor asked me to come up, and I'll tell you the story. And he would tell you the exact same thing. His name was Mark. He's one of the toughest. Cowboy pastor. Wore cowboy boots every single Sunday. We had these altar benches, and when he would get up to preach, he wouldn't use the stairs. He'd put his foot up on the altar bench and step onto the platform. I mean, he was cowboy. I'm like, he still did camping, and he had the horse clean the plates after dinner. I'm not joking. I'm like, the horses lick the plates. I never went camping with Mark Rose. And he got together, and he told his youth pastor, he says, I want to meet this kid, and I'm going to set him straight. The fact that he thinks he can come serve here. His words. I'm like, this guy needs to go off to Bible college. He doesn't need to come here and everything else. So we went to have lunch. I had no idea this conversation had taken place. And we sat down, and he said, I remember him saying to me, he goes, I'm interested in having you as our intern at our church, but only if you could tell me what God wants to do in our community. And I can't remember for the life of me what came out of my mouth. But at the end of that conversation, Mark said, not only are we going to bring you on as an intern, we're going to pay you to come on staff at our church. Because that morning I had spoken to him the exact things that God had spoken to him in his prayer life, point for point. I think there were 7 points he had written down in his journal, and I talked about each and every one of them, almost word for word. That's God, not me. So God had a plan for us in Norfolk. We were part of an amazing explosion. If you used to go, when you go to get credentials with the Assemblies of God, you used to have to take a class called Soul Winning. And actually the story of what took place is in that book, Soul Winning. And we saw God do amazing things. I brought a man to God named Dewey Dykes Chandler. And he was the local bartender at one of the popular bars in town. He also worked at the arcade, so he knew all the kids and he knew all the parents. He got radically saved for Jesus, cut drugs and alcohol out of his life, opened up his home, and he was taking in guys that were, addicts, complete and total addicts into his home, clean them up for a week, come to church on Sunday morning. They would get saved, and we'd be shipping them out to Teen Challenge 3 weeks later. I mean, crazy stuff that God was doing. And then from there, I became a youth pastor in Omaha, Nebraska. And I'll share that story really quickly with you. I had finished up my internship, went back to live with my parents for a little while. I planned to go down to Bible college at CBC. And took a trip down, had been working, saved up my money. At the same time, I was attending a church called Pacific Springs, which is no longer called Pacific Springs, but was there. And they had asked me, through some coincidences, to come on staff as the youth pastor 3 times. And I said, no, I'm not married. And my reason for saying that was the fact I had seen people in ministry that weren't married and they made stupid mistakes, or something happened and it disqualified them from ministry. I didn't want that for my life. And so I didn't even pray about it. I'm like, no, I'm going to go to Bible college. And because that's what you're supposed to do. That's how God works. And went down to CBC, walked on the campus, and instantly felt like I'd missed God. And so what do you do when you miss God? Well, this young guy decided that I'll just go to school for a year and have God figure it out. Because obviously I've screwed this up. And took all my stuff into the admissions office, was talking to the lady in the admissions office. She looked at me as I slid my paperwork across the desk, I signed everything and had the check. Tears began to stream down her eyes. And she said, son, God has called you to full-time ministry, and you don't think you're ready. But God decides when someone's ready. Slid the paperwork back across the desk and said, CBC cannot accept your registration at this time, because if we did, we'd be helping you sin. Wow. And at that point, I humbled myself, went back with the tail between my legs, talked to my senior pastor, and became the youth pastor at that church for 9 years, finished up my credentialing process online and with the district. From there, we served 9 years in Omaha. We then served 6 years as Chi Alpha directors in Brookings, South Dakota, where I met Jeff. And brother, we've got stories that we could tell about lives being changed in crazy, phenomenal ways, and college dumpster fires and all sorts of craziness that we could share. But because of time this morning, I'm not going to share those. At the end of that season, when that season had come to a close, God had asked me to resign, not knowing where my next position in ministry would be. The crazy thing is, when God spoke that into my life, my wife had just been released from the job that she had as a photographer for a company that did school, what do you call those? Yearbooks. So she had just been let go. God spoke to me and said, I'm going to need you to resign. And that was it. We had no other direction. And so just waited on God. And a series of coincidences happened. Senior pastor walked by my office one morning and said, hey, can you come into my office? What we had found out, this was not being told to us, we were going to find out later that day in our staff meeting, is that the church had blessed us a year earlier paying for our health insurance for all of our staff members. That became far more expensive than they thought. Well, the money had dried up. They were no longer able to keep all of us on staff, and one of us was going to have to go. And I looked at my senior pastor, because in his mind it was going to be someone else. And I said, God's already spoken to me that I would need to resign. And that afternoon, went home. I said, I need an hour to talk with my wife. Went home, talked with my wife. Because God had spoken to me. I had not told my wife what God had told me yet. And she was in agreement. This was the right thing. It was tearful. It was hard. We loved our college students very much. And we resigned and walked through that process. We went to the superintendent. Said, look, we got no place to go, so we'd like to stay in town, but we'd like to attend another Assemblies of God church because we don't know where we're going. And we were very good friends with the superintendent of the district in South Dakota, but South Dakota is very limited on how many church opportunities there are. And he said, look, I've got 2 churches that are open. I can't send you to either of them because it would kill you. He goes, these are churches that we may not have in a few years. And he goes, but what I'd like to do is tomorrow I am meeting with all the superintendents around the nation. If you tell me what districts that you want, I will hand deliver your resume to them. So we decided we wanted to try to stay close to family. So we picked a bunch of states in the Midwest. And I'm a Green Bay Packers fan. If you've got a picture, you can show that, just so you know I'm telling the truth. There I am as a teenager. That was when I attended Bellevue Christian Center. I was a Packers fan through and through. I said, well, how about Wisconsin? Because I'm a Packers fan. The reason my resume came to ripping partially was because I was a Packers fan. And so we resigned. We stayed where we were. We were attending another church. Some of you met John and Amanda. Amanda came and preached here a few years ago. They took us in. We're good friends with them, and they just let us attend. My wife and I both got hired by the university because this is where character and integrity counts. We've got character and integrity people notice. And the college gave us both a job. My wife worked as a secretary for the College of Education, and I worked in maintenance. And they found out I did not know a thing about maintenance, but they loved me anyway. And had a great time with them. We had sent out 40 resumes to different churches. This church was the first resume I had sent. This church received 40 resumes. I was the first resume they received. The head of the board at that point in time, or the committee that was on the pastoral search committee, said, "You never take the first resume, put it on the bottom." We had gone through several different churches. We were in the top 3 and never got invited to go anywhere. We'd get phone calls saying, "Hey, we're very interested in you." And then I'd find out on Facebook that they hired another guy and they'd never contact us to say we didn't get the job. So I was a little hurtful. We don't handle things that way here when we do things. So I learned a lot through that process. But I remember sitting on the stairs at my house, and God spoke to me and said, "Son, I can bring your resume to the top whenever I want." And I went downstairs and I told Pam, I said, "We're not going to put out any more resumes." So we put out 40. We'll do it if somebody comes to us and says, "You need to apply to this church," or vice versa. A church reaches out to us. But I said, I'm done fishing. God's got us here. And we surrendered. And in that moment, both Pam and I got raises in the following weeks. Our ministry boomed for us. We were making impact in people's lives. We couldn't, all of a sudden, it was like the doors just opened up. I was like, maybe God's just going to keep us on the campus to do ministry. And then this church called. And we came out. The rest is history. And that's why we're here. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. I am far from perfect, church. But I will say this. I love this community. I love you. And if there is one thing that the rest of my life is dedicated while I am here, it's to reaching people in our community for Christ. I'm not perfect at it. I fall down all the time. But if I'm going to fall, I want to fall down moving forward. So that's my story. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer those. But we do want to give a bathroom break to people. And we'll have some more people hopefully showing up for church today. If not, we'll have a huge online audience. So let's do this. Can we close in prayer today? Because listen, that was my story. But each one of you has a story. And I will tell you this, your story is far more interesting than mine. It's far more interesting than mine. God has you exactly where you need to be today. And if you're not where you need to be, God is better at getting you where you need to be than you are of struggling to get there. When God puts up a block, he's going to make sure that blockage is to change the course and direction of where you're at. If you feel like, I need to do this, but God puts up a block. Sometimes we're like, the devil's stopping me from doing this. Maybe God's stopping you because he sees things that you don't. Don't get frustrated. But learn how to surrender to the will of God and to learn peace at all times, contentment in all things. Because I'll tell you, God moves in great ways. When I missed the opportunity to go on staff at that church, how did God have to move? Through a lady who had never met me. I don't even know her name, but I'm incredibly grateful. Because if she hadn't done that, I wouldn't have married my wife. That's a God thing. Let God be in the driver's seat. Let's pray today.